The morning began the same as always. Crisp air, coffee steaming in my grip, and that careful, measured walk to the car courtesy of a bad leg and the cold weather squeak of my metal brace. The sun had just cleared the rooftops of our cookie-cutter suburb. Light bounced off endless rows of identical SUVs. My blue handicap placard hung exactly where it belonged on the rearview mirror. I'd learned long ago that the HOA would ticket you for the smallest infraction if you gave them any excuse. But that morning, someone had claimed my spot. A glossy red Corvette sat gleaming in the clearly marked handicap space like it was daring anyone to object. I stood there staring for a solid minute, waiting for reality to correct itself. It didn't. My spot, the one that saved me from hobbling half a block on my cane, had been taken. I knew the license plate. I knew the smug high school football sticker in the back window. It belonged to Karen's son. Of course, it did. Karen, self-crowned president of the HOA and self-appointed enforcer of every petty rule. The same woman who once taped a note to my door, complaining that my wind chimes were audibly disruptive. I snapped a photo of the Corvette, another of the handicap sign, then slid a calm note under the wiper blade. This space is reserved for accessible parking. Please respect the designation. Some residents genuinely require it. 10 minutes later, halfway back to my apartment, I heard her voice slice through the quiet sharp enough to crack glass and ruin mornings in equal measure. Excuse me, did you leave this note on my son's car? Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms folded tight across her chest, floral robe dotted with tiny roses like camouflage for suburban combat. Yes, I answered evenly. He's parked in a handicap spot. She gave a theatrical scoff. He was only there for 5 minutes. You don't own the space, you know. HOA rules don't cover temporary guest parking. Accessibility laws apply to everyone, I said, her eyes narrowed to slits. You really ought to watch your tone when speaking to an HOA board member, sweetie. We take complaints very seriously. The way she emphasized we sent a cold twist through my gut. That night, I found an unsigned note taped to my front door. Please refrain from causing trouble. This community values harmony. And just like that, the lines were drawn. The next morning, I woke to the deep growl of an engine. That same Corvette. I eased the curtain aside and watched Ryan back the car halfway out of the handicap space only to slide it right back in. He glanced up at my window and flashed a slow, deliberate smirk. Subtle as a sledgehammer. By the time I made it outside, coffee still warm, patience already threadbare, Karen was in her front yard, watering her hydrangeas, her daily ritual of pretending to garden while keeping watch over the entire street. Morning, I said, voice clipped. As I passed, she turned with that tight, practiced smile that could sour cream. Good morning. Oh, I saw your little note made it into the HOA inbox. You're certainly committed to following every rule, aren't you? I stopped. You're the HOA president. You know parking in a handicap space without a permit is illegal. Her smile never wavered. It's not illegal if it's only for a moment. Besides, Ryan was just visiting his mother. Technically, I'd file a complaint against you for harassment. I blinked, genuinely speechless at the idea that stating a law could be twisted into harassment. Tone, she said, tapping her temple lightly. It's always about tone. By noon, the email arrived. Notice of community violation in bold across the subject line. My unauthorized signage, meaning the official city-issued handicap parking post I had installed with all the correct permits, was suddenly flagged for review. That was when it hit me. She wasn't merely defending her son. She was punishing me. I called the HOA office directly, skipping her entirely. The administrator, a patient man named Luis, sounded like someone who had already endured too many Karen calls that week. Sir, we've received multiple complaints from Mrs. Sanders Karen regarding your parking area, but she has no authority to challenge city signage. You're in full compliance. Good, I told him. Because I'm not removing it. That night, the laughter drifted through my open window. Teenagers, loud and careless. I peeked through the blinds. Ryan and 3 friends were posing for selfies beside the Corvette, still parked squarely in my spot, cans of beer glinting under the streetlight. Nice sign, bro. One of them yelled. pointing straight at my handicap placard. Anger rose inside me, not the hot, sudden kind, but the slow, steady burn that travels quietly and sure, like a lit fuse moving through dry grass. By morning, I had made up my mind. If the HOA refused to enforce its own rules, then maybe the universe would find a way to balance the scales. The air the next morning carried that heavy, expectant stillness, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see who would blink first. The Corvette was back in place, parked defiantly in my handicap spot, as though it had always belonged there. Karen was already outside, snipping at phantom twigs on her rose bushes, pretending she wasn't tracking every slow step I took toward my car. I could almost feel the smug curve of her mouth through the thick hedge. "Morning," she called in that sing-song tone, eyes still on her pruning shears. "You might want to pull your trash bins a little closer to the curb. HOA regulations are very clear on that." I didn't break stride. "You might want to remind your son that the law says this is my parking space." She let out a short, brittle laugh. "You're turning into quite the neighborhood complainer, aren't you?" "Not very neighborly at all." I gave her the same tight smile she always wore. Just observant. That afternoon, while she hosted her weekly HOA strategy session, which, judging by the laughter and clinking glasses drifting across the street, was mostly gossip and chilled Ross, I handled my own quiet business. I dialed the city's non-emergency parking enforcement line. A calm woman named Gina listened patiently as I explained the situation. "Yeah," she said when I finished. "We've actually had a couple of calls about that exact address already. We'll have an officer swing by tomorrow." Perfect. But a small, stubborn part of me wanted more than just a ticket. Not revenge, not quite, just equilibrium. So that evening, I placed a simple handwritten sign at the edge of the space. "Reserved. Vehicles parked illegally will be towed." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. By nightfall, the Corvette returned. From my window, I watched Ryan stagger out, laughing too loudly with one of his friends. They kicked the sign over. One of them spat on it for good measure. Karen's porch light snapped on. "Boys, keep it down," she hissed. Though the words carried more amusement than annoyance, almost pride, that was when something inside me settled into place with a quiet finality. If she wanted to rule like an HOA monarch, so be it. But the universe, or perhaps just a worn-out man with a bad leg and excellent timing, was ready to deliver a small, pointed lesson in consequences. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. The street was still dark and silent when I stepped outside. Phone in one hand, flashlight in the other. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the rooftops, the Corvette no longer sat so arrogantly upright. I woke later to shouting, not ordinary shouting, but the kind that cuts through morning air and pulls every curtain on the cul-de-sac wide open like theater curtains before the big scene. "Who did this?" Karen's voice rang out, shrill and furious, echoing off the stucco walls. I took my time, cane in hand. I sipped my coffee, then eased the blinds apart. There she stood in the middle of the street, still in her robe, arms flung wide, like a general inspecting a lost battlefield. Her son's bright red Corvette remained in my handicap spot, only now it rested squarely on 4 neatly stacked concrete blocks. No wheels, no tires, just a gleaming, absurdly humiliated shell. I walked outside slowly, letting the moment unfold. Neighbors had already begun to gather. Phones were raised. Someone murmured, "Looks like karma finally clocked in." The instant Karen spotted me, she whirled. You did this?" I raised one eyebrow. "Did what, exactly?" "Call the police," she snapped, jabbing a trembling finger toward me. "You had my son's car vandalized." I tilted my head. "You sure about that?" Because considering he's been illegally parking in a handicap spot for 3 straight days now, it almost feels like the universe finally decided to stop waiting for you to teach him manners. Ryan, hands buried in his hair beside the car, muttered, "This is bull," before an officer stepped forward, cutting him off. The cop glanced from me to the vehicle. "Whose car is this?" Karen's hand shot up. "My son's." He nodded once. "He parked in a handicap space without a permit?" A tense silence. Then, grudgingly, "Yes, ma'am, I'll need to issue a citation," the officer said evenly. And you'll want to call a tow truck. This vehicle can't remain here. Karen's jaw clenched so hard I could hear the grind of her teeth from 10 feet away. As the tow truck's backup beeper filled the air, I turned to head back inside. My cane tapped steadily against the pavement, my voice calm but clear enough to carry. Some people only understand signs. Others need lessons. That night, the neighborhood group chat exploded with photos and speculation, grainy shots of the wheelless Corvette lighting up every screen. I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching the street. The spot was empty again. Mine. The blue lines glowed clean under the porch lights, and for the first time in days, the block was peaceful. If you've ever had to stand your ground against someone who believed the rules were optional for them, hit like. Real stories deserve to be heard. Subscribe to Karen's Hub so you never miss the next time karma decides to make an appearance, and drop a comment. What would you have done if it were your spot on the line?